Zarathek pressed her scaled palm against the observation deck's cold metal surface, watching the endless void of space stretch beyond the research station's reinforced windows. Her emerald eyes tracked the distant shimmer of the testing facility where her greatest pride and deepest fear resided together in one small, vulnerable form. The draconian scientist had dedicated her entire career to understanding the ancient bond between her people and their wyrmlings, the sacred dragon offspring that would one day grow into the magnificent beings that had carried her species across the stars. But Cassera was different. Born without wings, rejected by every flight instructor, deemed defective by the Council of Elders, her daughter represented both a scientific anomaly and a mother's heartbreak. Dr. Zarathek, the human delegation has arrived, announced her research assistant, Veltar, his voice carrying the subtle disapproval that had become commonplace whenever humans were mentioned. They're requesting immediate access to the stream chamber. Zarathek's jaw tightened. 3 months ago, when the Galactic Research Consortium had approved the human request to study their experimental consciousness transfer technology, she had fought the decision with every political connection she possessed. Humans were newcomers to the galactic stage, barely 2 centuries since their first warp flight. What could they possibly understand about technology that her people had been perfecting for millennia? Yet here they were, and her superiors had made it clear that cooperation was not optional. The stream chamber represented the pinnacle of draconian achievement, a device that could temporarily transfer consciousness between compatible beings, allowing researchers to experience different forms of awareness and understanding. Originally designed to help young wyrmlings bond with their eventual riders, it had evolved into something far more sophisticated. The technology could theoretically bridge any gap between sentient minds, but it required perfect genetic and neurological compatibility. Zarathek made her way through the station's corridors, her clawed feet clicking rhythmically against the polished floor. The research facility orbited a gas giant whose swirling storms provided the unique electromagnetic conditions necessary for the stream's operation. She had spent 15 years of her life here, rising from junior researcher to department head, all while developing the protocols that made consciousness transfer safe and reliable. The human delegation waited in Conference Chamber 7, and Zarathek paused outside the door to compose herself. Through the transparent aluminum, she could see 3 figures seated around the circular table. 2 wore the standard blue uniforms of the human Space Corps, while the third dressed in simple civilian clothes that somehow managed to look more professional than any uniform. Dr. Zarathek, Captain Sarachan rose as the Draconian entered, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. "Thank you for accommodating our research request. I know this wasn't your first choice." Zarathek studied the human woman. Chen appeared young by draconian standards, perhaps 40 standard years, with dark hair pulled back severely and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of their surroundings. Her grip was firm but not challenging when they shook hands. "Captain Chen. I trust you understand the cultural significance of what you're asking to observe," Zarathek replied, settling into her chair with fluid grace. "The stream technology is not merely a scientific tool for my people. It represents thousands of years of spiritual and technological development." "We appreciate the honor," Chen said, then gestured to her companions. Dr. Marcus Webb, our xenobiology specialist, and Dr. Elena Vasquez, our consciousness research theorist. We've all studied draconian culture extensively in preparation for this opportunity. Dr. Webb leaned forward, his enthusiasm barely contained. "Your work on cross-species consciousness bridging could revolutionize how different races understand each other." "The implications for diplomacy alone, Dr. Webb," Zarathek interrupted, her tone professional but cold. "Before we discuss implications, perhaps you should understand what you're actually requesting to witness. The stream isn't a casual demonstration. It requires a subject, and the only available test subjects are wyrmlings." She paused, letting the weight of that statement settle. "Young dragons who have not yet learned to shield their minds from outside influence. The process involves temporarily overwriting their consciousness with that of another being. For research purposes, this is typically done with adult draconians who can guide the experience safely." Dr. Vasquez spoke for the first time, her voice carrying a slight accent that Zarathek couldn't place. "We understand the risks, Dr. Zarathek. Our research focuses on consciousness transfer protocols that could help individuals with severe neural trauma. We've developed some theoretical frameworks, but we lack practical experience with successful transfers. And what makes you think human consciousness would be compatible with Wyrmling neural pathways? Zarathek asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. The preliminary scans that all visitors underwent had revealed something disturbing about human brain structure, something that kept her awake at night analyzing data. Captain Chen and her team exchanged glances before Chen answered. Our medical scans suggest that human neural architecture shares some unexpected similarities with draconian patterns. Specifically, the regions that your species associates with what you call flight consciousness appear to be highly developed in humans as well. Zarathek had hoped they wouldn't notice. The scans had indeed shown remarkable compatibility, but she had been trying to downplay the significance. Humans possessed neural pathways that corresponded almost exactly to the flight bonding centers in draconian brains, despite never having evolved the ability to fly. It was as if their brains were designed for connections they had never been able to use. The similarity is superficial, Zarathek said, though she knew it wasn't entirely true. Neural architecture doesn't guarantee successful consciousness transfer. The process requires not just compatibility, but understanding. Wyrmlings respond to thoughts and emotions they recognize. What could a human mind possibly offer that would be familiar to a young dragon? Dr. Vasquez smiled, and Zarathek felt a chill run down her spine. That's what we're here to find out, Dr. Zarathek. Human consciousness has some unique properties that might surprise you. The conversation was interrupted by an alert from Zarathek's personal communicator. Her assistant's voice crackled through the small device with barely concealed excitement. Dr. Zarathek, you need to come to Lab 3 immediately. It's about Kessera, she's attempting contact with the stream chamber. Zarathek's blood went cold. Kessera was supposed to be in her quarters, safely away from any experimental equipment. The Wyrmling was barely 6 months old, still learning basic motor control, and completely untrained in the mental disciplines necessary to survive stream contact. Excuse me, Zarathek said, already rising from her chair. There's been a development that requires my immediate attention. Captain Chen stood as well. If this involves the stream technology, perhaps we could observe? This might be exactly the kind of real-world application we came to study. Absolutely not, Zarathek snapped, then forced herself to moderate her tone. This is a family matter involving an untrained Wyrmling. The risks are too great for observers. But, even as she hurried toward Lab 3, Zarathek's scientific mind was racing. If Kessera was somehow interacting with the stream chamber on her own, it could mean that her daughter's neural pathways were far more developed than anyone had realized. Flightless Wyrmlings were supposed to have underdeveloped consciousness bonding abilities, but what if Kessera was different in ways that went beyond her missing wings? Lab 3 hummed with activity when Zarathek arrived. Her research team clustered around monitoring stations, their faces showing mixtures of excitement and concern. The stream chamber itself, a crystalline sphere suspended in the center of the room by magnetic fields, pulsed with soft blue light that indicated active neural scanning. What's her status? Zarathek demanded, pushing through the crowd to reach the central console. Veltar looked up from his readings, his expression troubled. She managed to activate the proximity sensors somehow. The chamber is reading her neural patterns, but she hasn't attempted full contact yet. The readings are unusual. Zarathek studied the data scrolling across the holographic displays. Kessera's brainwave patterns showed activity in regions that shouldn't have been developed for months, possibly years. The Wyrmling's consciousness was reaching out toward the stream chamber with a sophistication that defied everything they understood about dragon development. Where is she now? Zarathek asked. In the observation alcove, Veltar replied, pointing toward a small chamber adjacent to the stream room. She's been there for about 10 minutes, just watching. The proximity sensors activated the moment she entered. Through the alcove's transparent wall, Zarathek could see her daughter. Kessera was perhaps 3 feet long from snout to tail, her scales a deep purple that would darken to black as she matured. Where wings should have sprouted from her shoulders, only smooth scales marked the genetic absence that made her unique among their kind. But it was Kessera's eyes that caught Zarathek's attention. The Wyrmling stared at the stream chamber with an intensity that seemed impossible for someone so young. Those golden eyes tracked the device's subtle movements with the focus of a trained researcher, not a curious child. "Has she attempted direct contact?" Zarathek asked. "Not yet, but her neural activity suggests she's preparing for it," Veltar replied. Dr. Zarathek, "I've never seen patterns like this from an untrained Wyrmling. It's as if she instinctively understands what the chamber does." Zarathek moved closer to the observation window, her heart racing with a mixture of pride and terror. If Kessera was naturally compatible with stream technology despite her physical limitations, it could change everything they thought they knew about Wyrmling development. But it could also be incredibly dangerous. "Should we intervene?" asked Dr. Rathven, one of her senior researchers. Zarathek hesitated. Scientific protocol demanded that they separate Kessera from the chamber immediately. An untrained Wyrmling attempting consciousness transfer could suffer permanent neural damage or worse. But the readings they were getting suggested that her daughter was anything but typical. "Monitor her closely, but don't interfere yet," Zarathek decided. "If her neural activity spikes beyond safe parameters, we extract her immediately." Behind her, she heard the lab doors open and turned to see Captain Chen and her team entering despite explicit instructions to stay away. Before Zarathek could object, Chen spoke. "Dr. Zarathek, our portable sensors are detecting some extraordinary readings from this location. If that Wyrmling is about to attempt consciousness transfer, we need to be here. Human neural research might be relevant to what's happening." "This is not a time for human theories," Zarathek began, but Dr. Vasquez interrupted her. "Look at your readings more carefully," Vasquez said, pointing to the holographic displays. "Those neural patterns aren't just advanced for a Wyrmling, they're showing human-like consciousness structures." Zarathek stared at the data with new eyes. The patterns that had seemed remarkably sophisticated for a young dragon suddenly took on a different significance when viewed through the lens of human neural architecture. Kessera's brain was generating the exact types of consciousness waves that Vasquez's team had been studying. "That's impossible," Zarathek whispered, but even as she spoke, she knew it wasn't. The similarities between human and draconian neural patterns weren't superficial coincidence, they were the result of some deeper connection that neither species had yet understood. In the observation alcove, Kessera suddenly moved closer to the stream chamber. The crystalline sphere's blue light intensified, responding to the Wyrmling's proximity with eager pulses that indicated preparation for full neural contact. "Her consciousness is expanding," Dr. Webb observed, studying his portable scanners. "It's like she's reaching out to something specific." Zarathek watched in fascination and horror as her daughter approached the greatest achievement of their civilization with the confidence of someone who had been born to use it. The stream chamber had been designed to bridge consciousness between compatible minds, but what if compatibility went deeper than anyone had imagined? "All teams, prepare for emergency neural extraction," Zarathek commanded, but she made no move to stop what was happening. For the first time since Kessera's birth, her daughter was demonstrating capabilities that went far beyond the limitations everyone had assumed. The stream chamber's light grew brighter as Kessera placed one small claw against its surface. Neural activity spiked across all monitoring stations, and Zarathek held her breath as her daughter crossed the threshold into consciousness transfer. But instead of the chaotic neural storm they had expected from an untrained Wyrmling, Kessera's patterns remained remarkably stable. More than stable, they were expanding, reaching out through the stream's network with a precision that suggested she somehow understood exactly what she was doing. "She's not just using the stream," Dr. Vasquez said in amazement. "She's improving its efficiency. Look at these power consumption readings, she's operating the entire network at 97% efficiency. Our best trained operators only achieve 70%. Zarathek felt the world shift around her as she realized what she was witnessing. Her daughter, the flightless Wyrmling that everyone had written off as defective, was demonstrating mastery of their most advanced technology. But, more than that, she was doing it in a way that suggested deep understanding of principles that even adult draconians struggled with. The stream chamber pulsed once more, then settled into a steady rhythm that indicated successful consciousness integration. Kessera remained motionless against its surface, her small form dwarfed by the massive device, but her neural pattern showed that she had somehow achieved full compatibility with a system designed for beings 10 times her age. "What is she doing in there?" Captain Chen asked, her voice hushed with awe. Zarathek studied the readouts, her scientific training warring with her maternal instincts. "She's learning," she said finally. "The stream chamber contains the accumulated consciousness patterns of thousands of successful transfers. She's downloading and integrating that information." "But that should be impossible," Veltar protested. "No Wyrmling has the neural capacity to process that much data." Dr. Vasquez stepped forward, her eyes bright with understanding. "Unless her neural architecture is more similar to human consciousness patterns than you realized. Human brains are designed for rapid information integration and pattern recognition. If she's processing data like a human rather than like a typical Wyrmling." The implications hit Zarathek like a physical blow. If Kessera possessed human-like consciousness abilities while retaining draconian neural compatibility, she represented something entirely new, a bridge between species that could fundamentally change how different races understood each other. But before Zarathek could fully process these revelations, alarms began blaring throughout the laboratory. Emergency lights bathed the room in red strobes as automated safety systems activated. "What's happening?" Chen demanded. Veltar's claws flew over his control console. "Something's wrong with the stream network. Kessera isn't just accessing the local chamber, she's connected to the entire planetary grid. Every consciousness transfer device on the station is now linked through her neural patterns." Zarathek felt ice form in her veins. The planetary grid contained not just research data, but the active consciousness patterns of dozens of Wyrmlings and their trainers currently engaged in bonding exercises. If Kessera's untrained mind disrupted those connections, the results could be catastrophic. "We need to extract her immediately," Zarathek said, but even as she reached for the emergency disconnect controls, she hesitated. The readings showed that despite accessing far more data than should have been possible, Kessera's neural patterns remained remarkably stable. More stable, in fact, than they had ever been. "Wait," Dr. Vasquez said urgently. "Look at the network efficiency readings. She's not disrupting the other connections, she's optimizing them. Every active transfer on the station is now operating at peak efficiency." Through the observation window, Zarathek could see Kessera's form glowing with the reflected light of the stream chamber. Her daughter had become the central node of a consciousness network spanning the entire research facility, and, somehow, impossibly, she was making it work better than it ever had before. The alarms continued to blare, but the actual readings told a different story. Across the station, consciousness transfer procedures that had been struggling were suddenly proceeding smoothly. Wyrmlings who had been having difficulty bonding with their trainers were achieving perfect synchronization. The entire network was humming with an efficiency that their most optimistic projections had never imagined possible. "She's not just using the technology," Captain Chen observed, her voice filled with wonder. "She's teaching it how to work better." Zarathek realized that everything she thought she knew about her daughter, about Wyrmling development, and about the fundamental nature of consciousness itself was about to change forever. Kessera wasn't defective, she was evolutionary, a new form of intelligence that bridged the gap between species in ways no one had thought possible. But, as the first emergency response teams began arriving at the laboratory, Zarathek also realized that her daughter's abilities would make her both incredibly valuable and incredibly vulnerable. In a galaxy where power often determined survival, Kessera represented a capability that every species would want to control. The stream chamber pulsed brighter, and, through their connection, Zarathek felt something she had never experienced before, a brief touch of her daughter's consciousness, expanded and enhanced by the network she now commanded. In that instant, Zarathek glimpsed the vast potential that lay hidden within Kessera's unique neural architecture. Her flightless Wyrmling had found her wings in the vast network of consciousness that connected their people. But, in doing so, she had also attracted attention that would change everything for both of them. The emergency council meeting convened 6 hours after Kessera's initial contact with the stream chamber. Zarathek sat rigidly in the defendant's chair, watching as the most powerful figures in draconian science and politics filed into the circular chamber. The Council of Elders had arrived by emergency transport from the homeworld, their ancient faces carved with disapproval and suspicion. Elder Vexthar, his midnight blue scales dulled with age but his golden eyes sharp as ever, studied the data tablets before him with methodical precision. Dr. Zarathek, he began, his voice carrying the authority of 5 centuries of leadership, your offspring has demonstrated unauthorized access to restricted consciousness transfer protocols. The implications of this breach extend far beyond simple disciplinary action. With respect, Elder Vexthar, Zarathek replied, keeping her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her chest, Kessera didn't breach anything. The stream chamber responded to her natural neural patterns. If anything, this suggests we need to reconsider our assumptions about Wyrmling development. Elder Mordain, her silver scales gleaming under the chamber's harsh lights, leaned forward. Natural neural patterns don't explain how a 6-month-old Wyrmling achieved 97% network efficiency. Our most experienced operators, with decades of training, rarely exceed 70%. This suggests either genetic manipulation or external influence. The accusation hung in the air like poison. Genetic manipulation was the highest crime in draconian society, a violation of the sacred trust between parent and offspring that carried sentences measured in centuries of exile. There has been no manipulation, Zarathek said firmly. Kessera's genetic profile is completely natural. The only anomaly is her lack of flight capability, which we've already documented extensively. Captain Chen, who had been granted observer status for the proceedings, raised her hand for permission to speak. Elder Vexthar's expression suggested he would rather ignore the human entirely, but diplomatic protocols demanded acknowledgement. Honored elders, Chen began, her tone respectful but confident, the human delegation has been monitoring this situation since its inception. We may have relevant information that could explain these unprecedented readings. Human theories are irrelevant to draconian physiology, Elder Mordain replied dismissively. Your species has been spacefaring for barely 2 centuries. What could you possibly understand about consciousness transfer technology that we have not already mastered? Dr. Vasquez stood beside Chen, her hands clasped behind her back in a gesture that somehow conveyed both respect and determination. Elder Mordain, we understand your skepticism. However, our research focuses specifically on the type of neural patterns we observed in Kessera's readings. Human consciousness operates on principles that appear remarkably similar to what your daughter demonstrated. Similar how? Elder Vexthar asked, his tone suggesting this was a waste of valuable time. Human neural architecture evolved to process vast amounts of disparate information and integrate it into coherent understanding very rapidly, Vasquez explained. We call it adaptive consciousness, the ability to take in new data, reorganize existing knowledge patterns, and achieve functional integration almost instantly. It's why humans adapt so quickly to new environments and technologies. Zarathek felt her heart stop. If the humans were suggesting that Kessera possessed human-like consciousness abilities, the political implications would be staggering. Draconians prided themselves on their unique mental gifts, particularly their ability to bond with Wyrmlings and operate consciousness transfer technology. The suggestion that humans might share or even exceed these capabilities would threaten the fundamental assumptions of galactic hierarchy. You're suggesting that my daughter has human neural characteristics? Zarathek asked carefully. Not exactly, Dr. Webb interjected, pulling up a holographic display of neural scan data. We're suggesting that human and draconian consciousness patterns share a common evolutionary ancestor. The regions of the brain that allow for consciousness transfer in draconians correspond almost exactly to the areas responsible for rapid adaptation in humans. The chamber fell silent as the implications of this statement settled. If humans and draconians shared common consciousness evolution, it meant that humans weren't the primitive newcomers that galactic society had assumed. It meant they possessed latent abilities that, under the right circumstances, could rival or exceed those of species considered far more advanced. Elder Mordain's scales had darkened to an ominous deep silver. You're claiming evolutionary kinship between our species? That's an extraordinary assertion requiring extraordinary evidence. Captain Chen stepped forward, her expression grave. We have that evidence, Elder Mordain. Our preliminary scans of Kessera's neural patterns show that she isn't just using human-like consciousness adaptation, she's doing it better than any human we've ever tested. The weight of that statement filled the chamber like a physical presence. Zarathek looked at her daughter, who had been sleeping peacefully in a specially designed carrier since her extraction from the stream chamber. Kessera appeared completely normal, just another Wyrmling too young to understand the monumental changes her abilities were creating in the world around her. Explain, Elder Vexthar commanded. Dr. Vasquez manipulated her holographic display, showing comparative neural scans. Human consciousness operates on what we call quantum coherence patterns, the ability to maintain multiple simultaneous awareness states and integrate them without losing coherence. It's a survival adaptation that allowed our ancestors to track multiple threats and opportunities simultaneously. She highlighted specific regions of the brain scans. Kessera's neural patterns show the same quantum coherence, but amplified beyond anything we've seen in humans. She can maintain not just multiple awareness states, but multiple consciousness streams entirely. When she connected to your stream network, she wasn't just accessing it, she was simultaneously processing every individual consciousness pattern in the network while maintaining her own distinct identity. The magnitude of what Vasquez was describing slowly dawned on everyone in the chamber. Consciousness transfer technology worked by temporarily merging compatible neural patterns, but it required extensive training to maintain individual identity during the process. Most operators could handle one or two simultaneous connections at most. Kessera had apparently managed dozens without any training whatsoever. That should be neurologically impossible, Elder Vexthar said, but his tone had shifted from dismissive to thoughtful. For a typical draconian consciousness, yes, agreed Dr. Webb. But if Kessera's neural architecture combines draconian consciousness transfer capabilities with human quantum coherence processing, she represents something entirely new. She's not just a bridge between species, she's a new form of consciousness entirely. Zarathak felt the chamber spinning around her. Her daughter wasn't just unusual, she was unique in the entire galaxy. The Flightless Wyrmling that everyone had dismissed as defective was actually the first example of a new type of sentient being, one that combined the best aspects of multiple species' consciousness abilities. But, with that uniqueness came danger. Every government, every research institution, every military organization in known space would want to study Kessera, to understand her abilities and, potentially exploit them. Her daughter would never be safe from those who saw her as a tool rather than a person. What are you recommending? Elder Mordain asked the human delegation. Captain Chen exchanged glances with her team before answering. We believe Kessera needs specialized training that combines draconian consciousness transfer protocols with human adaptive consciousness techniques. Neither approach alone will be sufficient to help her safely develop her abilities. You're proposing joint human draconian training protocols? Elder Vexthar's voice carried a mixture of incredulity and suspicion. We're proposing whatever will keep that Wyrmling safe while allowing her to reach her potential, Chen replied firmly. Our species may have cultural differences, but we share a common interest in protecting individuals with unique abilities from exploitation. Zarathek stood up abruptly, her maternal instincts overriding political caution. My daughter is not a research subject or a political asset. She's a child who needs protection, not experimentation. Dr. Zarathek, Elder Vexthar said gently, your daughter's abilities make her one of the most valuable individuals in known space. Whether we acknowledge it or not, she will attract attention from forces far beyond our control. The question is whether we can provide her with the training and protection she needs to survive that attention. The truth of that statement settled over Zarathek like a weight. She had spent Kessera's entire life protecting her daughter from the prejudice and disappointment that came with being flightless in a flying culture. Now she faced the opposite problem, protecting her from those who would value her abilities too highly. What kind of training are you proposing? Zarathek asked reluctantly. Dr. Vasquez manipulated her display again, showing a complex flowchart of training protocols. We've developed theoretical frameworks for consciousness expansion training that could help Kessera learn to control her abilities safely. The training would need to be gradual, carefully monitored, and adapted to her unique neural architecture. And where would this training take place? Elder Mordain inquired. That's where things become complicated, Captain Chen admitted. Kessera's abilities require access to consciousness transfer networks for proper development. But they also need the kind of adaptive training environments that only human facilities can provide. Ideally, the training would take place at a joint facility with access to both technologies. Elder Vexthar's expression darkened. You're proposing to remove a draconian wyrmling from our space for training by humans. The political ramifications alone, the political ramifications of doing nothing could be far worse, Chen interrupted. Every major power in the galaxy will eventually learn about Kessera's abilities. When they do, they'll all want to control her. A joint human-draconian facility would provide protection through shared responsibility. Zarathek looked at her sleeping daughter and felt her heart breaking. Every choice seemed to lead to separation, to a life where Kessera would never experience the simple joy of being just another wyrmling learning to fly. But she was beginning to understand that such a life had never been possible for her daughter. Dr. Zarathek, Elder Vexthar said softly, this decision cannot be yours alone. The implications extend far beyond your family. However, your input is crucial to any decision we make. What guarantees would there be for her safety? Zarathek asked. And for maintaining her connection to our culture? Dr. Webb leaned forward earnestly. We propose a joint custody arrangement. Kessera would split her time between facilities, learning draconian consciousness transfer protocols from your people and human adaptive techniques from ours. She would never be separated from her mother for extended periods. And security? Joint security provided by both species, Captain Chen replied. Any threat to Kessera would be considered a threat to both human and draconian interests. She would have the protection of both our fleets. Elder Mordain's scales had shifted to a more neutral tone. The proposal has merit, but it requires extensive negotiation. Security protocols, facility specifications, training curriculum, legal frameworks, all of this must be carefully planned. How long would such negotiations take? Zarathek asked. Months, at minimum, Elder Vexthar replied. During which time Kessera would remain here under close observation. As if summoned by the mention of her name, Kessera stirred in her carrier, golden eyes blinking open with the innocent curiosity of any wakening child. But, when she looked around the chamber, her gaze seemed to catalogue and analyze every detail with an intensity that reminded everyone present that this was no ordinary wyrmling. Mama? Kessera's voice was small and sweet, but, when she spoke, every monitoring device in the chamber registered a slight spike in consciousness activity from the direction of the stream chamber 3 levels below. Zarathek lifted her daughter from the carrier, feeling the familiar weight and warmth that had been her greatest joy for 6 months. But now she also felt the subtle vibration that indicated Kessera's neural patterns were constantly reaching out, constantly seeking connections and information to process. I'm here, little one, Zarathek murmured, but her eyes met Captain Chen's over Kessera's small head. Dr. Zarathek, Chen said quietly, there's something else you need to know. Our deep scans detected something unusual about Kessera's neural development patterns. She's not just growing rapidly, she's accelerating. Her consciousness abilities are expanding faster than either human or draconian baseline parameters would suggest. The implications hit Zarathek like a physical blow. If Kessera's abilities were not just advanced but actively accelerating, then whatever window they had for providing proper training was closing rapidly. Soon, her daughter might develop capabilities that no existing training protocol could safely guide. How long do we have? Zarathek asked. Dr. Vasquez consulted her readings. Based on current acceleration rates, perhaps 6 months before her abilities exceed our understanding entirely. After that point, she would be essentially self-taught, developing capabilities with no framework for safety or control. Elder Vexthar stood slowly, his ancient frame carrying the weight of a decision that would affect the future of multiple species. Then, we have no choice but to move rapidly. I authorize immediate commencement of joint training protocol development. Dr. Zarathek, you and your daughter will accompany the human delegation to their research facility while we establish proper long-term arrangements. Elder Vexthar, Zarathek protested, I haven't agreed to anything yet. The decision is no longer entirely yours, my dear, the elder replied with genuine sympathy. Kassera's abilities make her a resource too valuable to remain unprotected. If we don't provide her with proper training and security, others will attempt to take her by force. As if to emphasize his point, alerts began chiming throughout the chamber. Veltar, who had been monitoring communications from the laboratory, looked up with alarmed expression. Elder Vexthar, we're receiving priority communications from multiple sources. The Hegemony, the Trade Federation, and the Collective are all requesting immediate access to our research data. Somehow, word of Kassera's abilities has already leaked beyond our security protocols. The chamber erupted in concerned murmurs as the reality of their situation became clear. The galaxy's major powers had learned about Kassera's unique abilities in a matter of hours. Every political entity capable of interstellar travel would soon be making demands or threats to gain access to what they would see as a revolutionary strategic advantage. Captain Chen, Elder Vexthar said grimly, how quickly can your ship be ready for departure? We can launch within 2 hours, Chen replied. Our ship has the most advanced consciousness shielding technology available. Once Kassera is aboard, her neural signature will be undetectable to most scanning systems. Zarathek looked down at her daughter, who was watching the adults around her with that unsettling intelligence that seemed far too advanced for her age. Kassera's golden eyes met her mother's, and, for just a moment, Zarathek felt that familiar touch of expanded consciousness, a brief glimpse of her daughter's perspective that revealed a mind already operating on levels that defied easy comprehension. Mama, the voices are getting louder, Kassera said softly, and every consciousness researcher in the chamber immediately understood what she meant. The Wyrmling was detecting the neural patterns of everyone trying to locate her, their minds reaching across space through the same networks that had made her abilities possible in the first place. It's decided then, Zarathek said, her voice heavy with resignation and determination. We leave immediately. But, I want guarantees about her safety and her future. This arrangement continues only as long as it serves Kassera's best interests, not anyone else's. Captain Chen nodded solemnly. You have my word as a representative of humanity and, as a mother myself. Kassera's well-being comes first, always. As the chamber dissolved into frantic activity, security protocols activating, departure preparations beginning, diplomatic communications flooding in from across the galaxy, Zarathek held her daughter close and tried to memorize this moment. It was the end of the life they had known and the beginning of something unprecedented and dangerous. But, looking into Kassera's knowing eyes, she realized that her daughter understood far more about what was happening than anyone had given her credit for. The Wyrmling who couldn't fly had found wings in the vast networks of consciousness that connected thinking beings across space. Now it remained to be seen whether those wings would carry her to freedom or make her a prize in a game played by forces too powerful for any individual to resist. The stream chamber 3 levels below pulsed once in response to Kassera's emotional state, and, across the galaxy, sensitive instruments registered a brief spike of consciousness energy unlike anything they had ever detected before. The hunt for the Wyrmling who could rewrite the rules of consciousness itself had officially begun. The human research vessel Prometheus cut through hyperspace toward the edge of known space, its destination a joint research facility that officially didn't exist. Marcus Chen, Captain Sarah Chen's younger brother and the ship's consciousness specialist, monitored Kassera's neural patterns from the specially constructed observation bay while Zarathek maintained constant vigil over her daughter. 3 weeks had passed since their departure from the Draconian research station, 3 weeks during which Kassera's abilities had continued to develop at an alarming rate. The Wyrmling could now maintain consciousness contact with every member of the ship's crew simultaneously, a feat that should have been impossible even for trained adults. More troubling still, she seemed to be learning human emotional patterns as quickly as draconian ones. Dr. Zarathek, Marcus called softly, not wanting to wake the Wyrmling who was currently interfacing with the ship's navigation computer. We're approaching the neutral zone. The facility should be visible within the hour. Zarathek looked up from the scientific journals she had been studying, research papers about consciousness development that felt increasingly inadequate for understanding her daughter's unique evolution. Any sign of pursuit? Nothing on sensors, but that doesn't mean much. The major powers have ships that can mask their signatures just as well as ours. Marcus hesitated, then continued, there is something else, though. Kessera's been sending signals. What kind of signals? Consciousness pulses, transmitted through hyperspace using principles we don't fully understand. She's been doing it for the past 2 days, always when she thinks we're not monitoring closely. Zarathak felt ice form in her stomach. Who is she signaling? That's the problem, we don't know. The signals are too complex for our equipment to decode, and they're transmitted on frequencies that shouldn't be possible for any biological consciousness to generate. Before Zarathak could respond, Kessera's eyes opened, those unsettling golden orbs that seemed to contain far too much awareness for someone so young. I'm talking to the others, Mama. They've been waiting. What others, little one? Zarathak asked, though she dreaded the answer. Kessera sat up in her specially designed containment field, her small form dwarfed by the advanced monitoring equipment surrounding her. The ones like me. They're coming to help. Marcus's equipment immediately began registering massive consciousness activity, patterns unlike anything they had previously recorded. Dr. Zarathak, her neural output just increased by 300%. Whatever she's doing, it's far beyond anything we've seen before. Kessera, Zarathak said urgently, you need to stop whatever you're doing. It could be dangerous, it's not dangerous, Mama. It's necessary. The Wyrmling's voice carried an authority that made both adults step back instinctively. The hunters are getting closer. We need protection. As if summoned by her words, the ship's alert systems began blaring. Captain Chan's voice echoed through the corridors from the bridge, all hands to emergency stations. We have multiple contacts approaching on intercept vectors. Unknown vessel configurations. Marcus's readings spiked again as Kessera's consciousness reached out through space with increasing intensity. Dr. Zarathak, she's not just sending signals anymore, she's pulling something toward us. Through the observation bay's reinforced windows, space itself seemed to shimmer and bend. Reality twisted like heated glass, and, from the distortions emerged ships unlike anything in the databases of known civilizations. They moved with fluid grace that suggested organic rather than mechanical design, their surfaces shifting and changing like living tissue. Unknown vessels, this is Captain Chen of the research vessel Prometheus. Please identify yourselves and state your intentions. The response came not through communication channels, but directly through Kessera's consciousness interface. Every person aboard the ship suddenly heard a voice that spoke with harmonics impossible for any single throat to produce. We are the gardeners. We come for the seedling. Zarathak grabbed her daughter protectively, but Kessera remained calm, her small hand reaching toward the approaching ships with what looked like recognition. Mama, they're family, Kessera said simply. Different kind of family, but family. Marcus's scanners were going insane trying to analyze the newcomer vessels. Dr. Zarathak, these ships are generating consciousness fields that dwarf anything we've ever detected. Each one contains what appears to be thousands of individual minds working in perfect harmony. Captain Chen's voice crackled over the intercom again, mysterious vessels are requesting permission to dock. They claim to be here for diplomatic contact only. Dr. Zarathak, they're specifically asking for you and Kessera. Zarathak looked at her daughter, who was now glowing with the same soft light they had seen when she first contacted the stream chamber. But, instead of the chaotic energy of uncontrolled ability, Kessera's consciousness emanated calm purpose. They won't hurt us, Kessera said confidently. They've been watching and waiting for someone like me to develop. I'm what they call a bridge consciousness, someone who can connect different types of thinking. How do you know this? Zarathak asked. Because they've been teaching me through the signals. Not with words, but with understanding. They showed me what I am and why it matters. The lead Gardner vessel moved closer to the Prometheus, its organic-looking hull shifting to create a perfect docking interface. Through the consciousness connection, the harmonious voice spoke again. Dr. Zarathak, we request permission to meet with you and explain the situation. The seedling's development has reached a critical phase, and she requires guidance that neither human nor draconian training can provide. Marcus looked up from his readings with amazement. The consciousness field from their ship is perfectly calibrated to Kessera's neural patterns. It's like they designed it specifically for her. Zarathek felt the weight of another life-changing decision settling on her shoulders. Every choice since Kessera's birth had led them further from normal life and deeper into galactic politics beyond her understanding. But her daughter's calm confidence suggested that this encounter had been anticipated, perhaps even planned. Captain Chen, Zarathek called over the intercom, grant them permission to dock. But maintain full security protocols. Acknowledged. Bay 7 will be pressurized and ready in 10 minutes. As the docking procedures commenced, Kessera's consciousness field expanded again, this time reaching toward the approaching gardeners with what felt like eager anticipation. Through their connection, Zarathek caught glimpses of her daughter's perspective, a vast network of minds spanning multiple species and civilizations, all connected through consciousness-bridging individuals like Kessera. "Mama," Kessera said softly, "there are others like me throughout the galaxy. Not many, but enough. We're what happens when evolution reaches a certain point, when minds become capable of bridging not just individuals, but entire species." The magnitude of what her daughter was describing slowly sank in. Kessera wasn't just an anomaly or even a new form of consciousness. She was part of a larger pattern, a galactic-level development that occurred when civilizations became advanced enough to support consciousness-bridging individuals. The docking process completed with an efficiency that suggested the Gardner vessel could adapt its structure in real time to match any docking configuration. Through the bay's observation windows, Zarathek watched as beings emerged from the ship, creatures that defied easy categorization, their forms seeming to shift between different species characteristics. "They're shapeshifters?" Marcus asked in amazement. "Not exactly," Kessera replied. "They're what bridge consciousnesses become when they fully develop. They can take the characteristics of any species they've formed connections with. That's what I'll become eventually, if I learn to control my abilities properly." The idea that her daughter would someday transform into something resembling the fluid beings now entering the ship filled Zarathek with both wonder and terror. But Kessera's excitement at the prospect was unmistakable. The lead gardener entered the observation bay with movements that suggested perfect adaptation to both the ship's gravity and its atmospheric composition. When it spoke, its voice carried harmonics from dozens of different species. "Dr. Zarathek, I am called Shepherd in your languages, though my true designation would be difficult for individual consciousness to comprehend. I serve as a teacher and guide for developing bridge consciousnesses throughout this galactic region." "You've been watching Kessera?" Zarathek asked. "We monitor all consciousness development above certain thresholds. Bridge consciousnesses are rare, perhaps 1 in a billion individuals develops the necessary neural architecture. When they do appear, they require specialized guidance to prevent their abilities from destroying them." Marcus looked up from his readings. The consciousness field around this being is perfectly stable despite containing what appears to be thousands of individual patterns. "How is that possible?" Shepard's form shifted slightly, taking on characteristics more familiar to both human and draconian perception. When a bridge consciousness fully develops, it learns to maintain multiple simultaneous awareness states without losing individual identity. Eventually, those awareness states can include entire species consciousness patterns. "You're saying that Kessera could eventually carry the consciousness patterns of humans, draconians, and other species simultaneously?" Zarathek asked in amazement. "Not just carry them," Kessera interjected, her young voice carrying wisdom that seemed impossible for her age. "I could help different species understand each other perfectly. Wars happen because minds can't truly connect across species barriers. Bridge consciousnesses can eliminate those barriers." The political implications were staggering. If Kessera could eventually facilitate perfect understanding between species, she could end conflicts that had lasted for centuries. But she could also be seen as a threat by any group whose power depended on maintaining those conflicts. That's why the major powers are hunting her, Zarathek realized. They're not just interested in her consciousness transfer abilities, they're afraid of what she could become. Shepard's form flickered with what might have been approval. The hegemony fears loss of control over their subject species. The Trade Federation worries that perfect communication would eliminate the information asymmetries they profit from. The collective sees bridge consciousnesses as threats to their rigid mental hierarchies. So what are you proposing? Zarathek asked. Training and protection that only the gardeners can provide. We have facilities designed specifically for developing bridge consciousnesses, located in regions of space where the major powers cannot reach. Kessera would learn among others like herself, guided by those who have successfully completed the transition. Captain Chen's voice interrupted over the intercom. Dr. Zarathek, we have a problem. Long-range sensors are detecting multiple fleets approaching our position. Hegemony, Federation, and collective ships, all converging on our coordinates. Estimated arrival in 6 hours. Shepard's consciousness field pulsed with urgency. The seedling's signals have been detected despite our shielding efforts. Her abilities have grown beyond what current technology can hide. We must depart immediately. Depart to where? Zarathek demanded. The Sanctuary. A mobile facility that exists in folded spacetime, accessible only to those with advanced consciousness bridging abilities. Kessera would be safe there while completing her development. Zarathek looked at her daughter, who was watching the adults with that unsettling mature attention. What do you want, little one? Kessera's response came through consciousness contact as well as spoken words, her meaning absolutely clear despite the complexity of the concepts involved. I want to learn what I'm supposed to become, Mama. I want to help everyone understand each other the way I understand them. But, I don't want to leave you behind. The mother of a bridge consciousness is always welcome in the sanctuary, Shepard assured them. Indeed, the emotional stability provided by parental bonds is crucial for successful development. Dr. Zarathek's presence would be essential, not merely tolerated. Marcus looked up from his frantically beeping equipment. The approaching fleets are accelerating. Whatever decision we're making needs to happen now. Zarathek felt the familiar weight of choosing her daughter's future without fully understanding the implications. But, Kessera's calm confidence and the approaching threat made the decision unavoidable. How do we get to this sanctuary? She asked Shepard. Through consciousness translation. The seedling's abilities are already sufficient to bridge the gap between normal spacetime and folded space. She needs only minimal guidance to complete the translation. Kessera's excitement was palpable as her consciousness field expanded to encompass both the Gardner vessel and the Prometheus. I can feel the path, Mama. It's like the stream chamber, but bigger. Much bigger. Captain Chen, Zarathek called over the intercom, prepare the crew for. I'm not sure what to call it. Spatial transition? Consciousness translation, Shepard corrected. The ship and everyone aboard will be temporarily translated into consciousness energy, then reconstituted in the sanctuary's local spacetime. It's perfectly safe when guided by a properly developed bridge consciousness. And if something goes wrong? Chen's voice carried the concern of a captain responsible for her crew. Then, we all cease to exist, Shepard replied matter-of-factly. But, the alternative is capture by forces that would use the seedling's abilities for purposes that could destabilize galactic civilization. The approaching fleets were now visible as bright points moving against the starfield, their formation suggesting coordinated assault rather than diplomatic contact. Kessera's consciousness field pulsed with increasing intensity as she prepared to attempt something that no individual of her age had ever tried. I'm ready, Mama, she said simply. Trust me. Zarathek reached out and took her daughter's small hand, feeling the incredible power that flowed beneath that innocent exterior. I trust you, little one. Show us the way. Kessera's consciousness exploded outward, encompassing both ships and reaching beyond normal space into dimensions that her mother's mind could barely perceive. Reality twisted around them like fabric being folded by invisible hands. The stars outside stretched and blurred, becoming streams of light that pulsed in rhythm with Kessera's heartbeat. For a moment that lasted eternity, Zarathek experienced existence as pure consciousness, thought without form, awareness without boundaries, understanding without the limitations of species or individual perspective. She felt the minds of every crew member aboard both ships, their fears and hopes and dreams blending into a symphony of conscious experience. Then, with a sensation like diving into warm water, reality reasserted itself. The ships materialized in a vast chamber that seemed to exist inside a crystalline structure larger than most space stations. Through transparent walls, nebulae swirled in impossible colors, and other vessels floated in the distance, ships from species that Zarathek had never seen before. "Welcome to the sanctuary," Shepard said as the consciousness translation completed. "Here, the seedling will learn what she is truly capable of becoming." Cassera opened her eyes and smiled with pure joy. For the first time since her birth, her daughter was in a place designed for beings like herself, creatures of consciousness who transcended the normal boundaries of species and individual awareness. "Mama," Cassera said, her voice filled with wonder, "I can feel them all. Hundreds of bridge consciousnesses from across the galaxy, all learning and growing together. I'm not alone anymore." As Zarathek watched her flightless daughter take her first steps into a realm where wings were unnecessary because consciousness itself could soar, she realized that this was what Cassera had been meant for all along. Not to fly through atmosphere with physical wings, but to soar through dimensions of awareness that connected every thinking being in the galaxy. The Wyrmling who had been born without wings had found the greatest wings of all, the ability to bridge the vast gulfs between species, to create understanding where there had been only conflict, and to guide galactic civilization toward a future where consciousness itself became the common ground for peace. In the distance, warning signals indicated that the pursuing fleets had found only empty space where their quarry had vanished. The hunt was over, but the real adventure, the development of a bridge consciousness who could reshape the relationships between all galactic civilizations, was just beginning.